Welcome to the Mental Edit, where we keep it real, unfiltered, and honest, because mental health is complicated. I'm Megan.
And I'm Rachel. We're here to have candid conversations about mental health, what it is, what it isn't, and everything in between.
The Mental Edit is for educational and informational purposes only. We are mental health professionals, but this podcast is not therapy, medical advice, or a substitute for professional treatment. If you're struggling, we encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health provider. And if you're in crisis, please seek immediate help from a trusted professional or emergency services. Now, let's get into it.
Okay, cool.
Welcome back to the Mental Edit, episode 3 in our summer series. Today, we are going to be talking about PTSD and the misuse of trauma language in pop culture and society. And what we really want to talk about is the trend of people misusing words such as flashback or triggered, words associated with PTSD that have become watered down because of main culprit, Hollywood and social media, really banging these terms to the ground and taking away the sincerity of them. And unfortunately, with that comes lack of understanding towards people who do suffer or survive from post traumatic stress disorder. So, we're really excited to explore the real clinical picture of PTSD while focusing on some of these terms.
Yes. So the umbrella term of trauma really comes from PTSD, that formal diagnosis. So we're going to kind of talk about all of them together.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And I think the misunderstanding of these terms can truly do harm to the people who are living with them
Yeah.
and prevent them from getting treatment or just desensitize our own understanding so people feel that they're not being heard or seen when they suffer with trauma.
Yeah, I hear a lot from clients of reluctance to take on the different, like the different components of PTSD because they don't want to be associated with the pop culture use of it, right? And I always have to explain to them, for example, trigger is a very real thing. And it is okay to say you felt triggered if you felt triggered, right? But again, in pop culture, it's kind of been co opted, which is the theme of this series. So, anyway, let's get into it.
I think first it's important that we go over the true
Yeah.
DSM, again, our psychiatric, psychological Bible of definitions for PTSD. So we understand the true clinical definition.
Okay. So, according to the DSM, PTSD is a disorder that develops after exposure to actual or threatens. So, that's key. It can be an actual thing or could be a threat of something happening to you. Death, serious injury, or sexual violence. The trauma can be directly experienced, witnessed, or learned about as if it happened to a loved one. And that is called vicarious trauma, which we can actually talk about a little bit. So this is serious life-altering trauma, not, your day going poorly or someone sending you a mean text, things like that. So symptoms of PTSD fall into 4 clusters. So we have intrusion symptoms, which is flashbacks, nightmares, could be panic symptoms, memories coming to you out of nowhere often, right? There's avoidance. So a lot of times you will try to avoid reminders, conversation, people, places, anything associated with the event.
I mean, that avoidance really affects your daily living. You're no longer wanting to leave the house or go to the grocery store or go to family events.
Yeah. And if you witness something in a specific area, you might kind of avoid the mile radius around that area, right? If something happened with a specific person, you might avoid everyone associated with that person. So that's avoidance. Negative changes in mood and cognitions. This one's more complicated, right? So persistent guilt, shame, detachment, emotional numbness. I think, unfortunately, when unaddressed and not talked about, a lot of times the traumatic event becomes something that's our fault. Yes. I see that all the time. It breaks my heart. So a lot of shame comes when you're not talking about something. Um, and then I think it just kind of gets mixed up in people's mind and they kind of go through. I think when something happens, the natural thing to do is go through all the different ways you could have prevented it, maybe, right? Even with an accident that can happen with somebody, your kids, your parents, your dog,
Car accident.
right? You run through if I had just done this or gone this way, right? And that then puts the onus on yourself, right? You feel responsible for what happened to you.
Absolutely.
And then the last one is hyperarousal. So this one I think is like probably people are the most familiar with. It's that fight or flight nervous system reaction that some people have. This is kind of where the war veterans came in. I think this diagnosis came from war veterans, right? It has been since expanded over the years. But a traumatic event can really change the way your nervous system operates.
Absolutely.
So you have irritability, difficulty sleeping, and then there's this edginess, right? This constant on edge, hyperarousal, and you're just very easily startled. So those are the four categories. Um, I also want to differentiate between acute trauma reaction or stress and PTSD. So when something happens to you, you are allowed, so to speak, to have reactions to it.
Mhm.
You can feel, you can ruminate on what's happening. You can have some of these symptoms of PTSD, right? If you have support at the time, a lot of times when I've had clients for years, something will happen to them. We
Mhm.
will talk it through. And then that can kind of be a preventative, so to speak, for developing PTSD.
Being proactive in really understanding what happened and talking about it.
Yeah.
So just because you have symptoms of trauma or experience a trauma does not mean you need or did develop PTSD.
Yeah. So formally, they say if these symptoms in one of those categories, hyperarousal, fight or flight, persists after a month,
Yes, greater than a month.
then it shifts to the formal diagnosis of PTSD, which in the end, like, doesn't matter so much, but it is helpful to have a framework for reaction versus, something that becomes more ingrained
Chronic.
chronic in the way you operate. Yeah.
So what PTSD is not is a character being killed off your Netflix show and you say, "I'm so traumatized by that."
Yeah.
Or the ending of a situationship
Yeah.
and saying that was trauma. Yes, it could have presented with unpleasant feelings and emotions you want to avoid in the future, but it doesn't mean you have a diagnosis of PTSD.
Right.
And I think that also Hollywood portrays two images of PTSD, one being the war veteran
Mhm.
and one being the battered female.
Yeah.
And PTSD goes so much deeper than that. It can be a cancer diagnosis. It can be witnessing a really traumatic car accident. It can be worldly events that we witness, like people who were there and maybe didn't watch 9/11 happen in person, but were there and part of the world and it affected their daily life. So
Yeah.
PTSD is not just the war veteran or the battered woman.
I also tell my clients that you really don't get to choose, so to speak, what gives you PTSD, if that makes sense. I mean, this is such a light example, but it has been impactful in my life. I watched my really tiny dog
Mhm.
get attacked pretty brutally.
Mhm.
And I still to this day, it's been probably 10 years. I still to this day really struggle in dog parks. I struggle watching dogs and I've worked so hard on calming myself down, but I feel it in my body. And so that really let me know, like, you really don't get to choose what causes this traumatic response. And it's very hard to undo. And I just want to say that, right?
Well said.
PTSD is one of the hardest things we work with by far.
Yeah. There's one more point I'd like to make. PTSD is not always, or trauma isn't always what happened to us. Sometimes it's what we didn't receive or what didn't happen in us. And there's a newer term, it's not yet in the DSM, called CPTSD, chronic PTSD, but it's
Yeah.
very real. And where that usually stems from our relationships as children with emotionally immature parents.
Yeah.
And it can come from emotional, physical neglect.
And it's so chronic invalidations, right? Of emotions or things that happened. Yeah.
So PTSD can be what we didn't receive.
Yeah.
And a lot of my patients, when I bring up PTSD in their childhood, they're like, I wasn't hit, or nothing bad really happened to me, or I didn't watch someone die. Well, it goes deeper. It can be that your emotions weren't validated, or that mom didn't show up to your rehearsal, or that someone wasn't there to pack a lunch for you or pick you up from school on time. The things that did not happen and were consistent,
Non-events, if you
yes,
will. Yeah.
throughout your childhood,
Yeah.
which makes your daily living, there's distress in your daily living or in relationships every day as an adult.
Yes, and that kinda goes back to attachment, which makes me really think we need to do an attachment episode. But, you learn inconsistent or anxious attachment styles from not getting your needs met on a basic level.
Yes. So
And that does lead to PTSD. PTSD. Sorry.
CPTSD. There's a great book that I suggest to my
Yeah.
patients. It's called CPTSD From Surviving to Thriving. And it's by
Should've brought
Pete
this time.
Walker. It's my favorite book.
It's good.
And why I do love this book, if anyone feels like they wanted to read it, is because it gives you warnings at the beginning of each chapter. If you don't have a religious or spiritual background, skip this chapter. Or if you struggle with body image and eating disorders, skip over this chapter. So I feel confident suggesting it to patients and clients because I don't have to read it along with them and necessarily process it. I know that it is a safe book.
Yeah.
And it gives a lot of validation.
Okay, so let's get into some of the terms that we want to cover today that we feel are being popularized, which again, we always say it's good to have awareness around these terms. However, they can't be losing their meaning, and that's our main gripe with them, right? So the first word is trauma.
Yeah. So, trauma, we are going to experience traumas in our life, but we are also going to experience unpleasant experiences in our life, such as losing a job or a breakup. And just because we lose our job doesn't mean it needs to be trauma. So, when we experience something negative, that does not, or a negative emotion or feeling, it does not mean we need to always associate it with trauma or PTSD.
Or call yourself traumatized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because then we're stepping away from what the word truly means. We're humans. We are going to experience unpleasant experiences.
Yeah.
They could happen daily. But then by overusing these words, trauma then becomes a buzzword.
Yeah.
And we don't want to over pathologize normal human experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And what makes us human and different from animals is that we can share experiences and emotions. So I feel what's most important if we experience a negative feeling or emotion is to talk about it and relate with others and don't hold it inside. We talk a lot with trauma about the classic book, The Body Keeps Score.
Yeah.
And it's one that I don't recommend reading on your own without
Yeah.
working through it with a professional. But if we don't talk and process these traumas, they're going to come out later in our life.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we're handling trauma with respect, the word trauma or term trauma with respect and using it appropriately.
Yeah. One thing we see a lot is this idea of trauma bonding, which is just like, don't do that, Like, I see that a lot, and it always just gives me a weird feeling because generally trauma is silent, trauma is pervasive. It's
Yeah.
not something you are necessarily so open and out with if it's really impactful to you. I would say that about a lot of diagnoses, but for sure, trauma, like if something's traumatizing, it's typically hard to talk about, right? So the trauma bonding thing that we see in culture is problematic to say the word. So
Brings up a really good point. So I feel that online and through Instagram, people are using something negative they went through to create an identity. And there's this new opportunity for trauma identity online. And then people can trauma bond together through online platforms, which again, support community, awesome. But what you said about someone with PTSD feeling invisible and unseen and unheard and isolated is more of the clinical presentation of
Yeah.
true PTSD.
Yeah.
So someone going online after a negative experience and creating an Instagram account to live the life of their PTSD every day and have other people experience it with them isn't a true portrayal of how PTSD is seen and experienced.
And this kind of brings me to the next term, which is trigger.
Mhm.
Um,
They're sometimes used interchangeably,
yeah.
triggered in trauma.
This one is very tricky because I know that it's used a lot in the concept of like trigger warnings, right? I think that's kind of when people, and listen, I want you to be exposed to something that you didn't want to be exposed to that will trigger trauma for you. No. But in having constant trigger warnings about stuff, we're kind of closing off conversations and not fostering a sense of resilience, right? So when you are exposed to a trigger and you work in therapy on it, right? What I say is exposure to the trigger, calm yourself down, rationalize in your head, tell yourself you're okay, you can get through this, right? That's the messaging we want, not an avoidance, right? Because if we avoid triggers and we avoid things, it grows. So
Escape avoidance is not our friend.
Yeah. So, and then another thing is, I'll be talking through the reason trigger can be tricky is I'll be talking through something that happened with a client and their reaction. I'm like, sounds like you got triggered. And they don't want to take that on. And I'm like, listen, this is a real thing, right? If you were, for example, exposed to a certain kind of parenting style, right? And then as an adult, you go back to your parents and you experience this really big emotion as something that was not that deep, right? That is being triggered by your trauma from your childhood.
And let's explore it and understand it.
Yeah. And take it on, right? I always tell them, I'm like, it's okay to take it on. And I'm a little resentful that I have to like push this term on people in the therapy setting, right? And that to me is because it's been so co-opted. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But this is just my little bee in my bonnet about that.
I don't like when the word trigger is misused. Let's touch on some of those examples. One of them is someone just like, turn that song off the radio. I feel so triggered by it.
Yeah.
And okay, it could be used correctly if you were experiencing something and you were in a car accident as that song was played. That's one thing.
Right.
But if
It's just like a bad breakup
bad
or,
situationship
yeah,
ending,
yeah,
like we're not going to use the word triggered there.
yeah.
It is bringing up negative emotions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or don't light that candle. That's something again sensory that we've talked about before, but don't light that candle. That triggers me.
Yeah.
I just let's use it appropriately. And what you said is very interesting that when we do use it in a more clinical sense, people don't want to identify with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I think, just the consequence of the way it has been like taken, right, by pop culture. So our next term is nightmare. So everyone knows what a nightmare feels like, right? And it's actually, and the next time you have one, kind of, not to sink into it, but pay attention to how your body feels when you wake up. Racing heart, gasping for breath, so just jarring. That's actually can be what a flashback feels like when people are awake when they have PTSD, right? But this term nightmare has been kind of used for decades. This is not like a new thing, right? Oh, that person's such a nightmare. That was like a situation was a nightmare. Like I got stuck in traffic in the Holland Tunnel. What a nightmare. I'm not that pressed about that usage, but I do think it's, that feeling of a nightmare, which most people can say they've had, right? That's a good way to know what it feels like to be triggered.
So I'm going to break this down between bad dream and nightmare.
Oh,
They can be the same.
yeah.
The difference between a bad dream and a nightmare is the energy that carries on into the next day.
Oh, okay.
And this is how I assess for it in my patients. So
I like that.
two people could experience the same dream. We'll call one a bad dream where they wake up, they know what happens, and it leaves them, and they let it leave them. And the other person, there's such energy and emotions associated with that dream, where at noon the next day, they're still reliving it and feeling it in their gut.
Yeah.
Those are nightmares.
Yeah.
Or we then start to avoid going to bed because here we go again. I'm going to have to relive that dream and carry on through it and feel the energy again tomorrow morning. So it's not only just bad repetitive dreams,
Got it.
it's what comes from those dreams where, yeah, we start to relive the dream the next day or it stays with us.
That was a very much better way of explaining the nightmare. So kudos.
I want to just touch on something more psychiatric.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, there is a medication that I prescribe for nightmares in my patients who have a true diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and it's prazosin.
And because, they do start avoiding going to sleep, right? They'll do anything to kind of keep themselves awake.
And avoid these nightmares.
Also just like compounds your lack of functioning for day. Yeah.
Yeah, because the sleep-wake will change, the circadian rhythm will change. We then stop becoming a member of society because we're awake at night and sleeping during the day.
Yeah.
And that can also bring on depression. So we want to make sure we're addressing the nightmares.
Okay. So your client and do your patients report success with this drug?
Yes. So it's prazosin.
Yeah.
It's a blood pressure medication and it's able to suppress these dreams. So the patient isn't aware that they're having them. Yeah. It's really great. It doesn't cause in my patients any trouble with blood pressure. We start really low and we can titrate up. Some patients do need a higher dose, but we always start at 1 to 2 milligrams to take it right before bed, and it's able to silence those dreams. Really
amazing.
awesome
I think a lot of people don't know about that. So,
it's a great tool.
If you don't know about it and you're interested, ask your psych provider because that's a great tool. Okay, so our last word is disassociate. This is, I feel like, your specialty. You've taught me so much about disassociation. So, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, dissociation. There's 3 types I like to hit on with dissociation. We talked about these in our panic disorder episode.
Yes.
Because in panic, sometimes we dissociate.
Yeah.
So the first form of dissociation is depersonalization. And that's when we feel like we leave our body or we're not in our body. And that's a common symptom of PTSD. The next one is derealization, where we leave reality and it almost feels like we're in this fog, haze, dreamlike movie
That's the one where
state.
you kind of are floating.
That's depersonalization. This one feels like you're in a movie and that you're not experiencing the reality.
Okay.
And then the last form of dissociation is amnesia, or when we have gaps in our memory towards the event itself.
Okay.
Disassociation is sometimes our body's way of protecting us,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
which is a beautiful, really awesome thing. Our bodies are so cool. But we look back on, let's say, a very traumatic incident that happened in our life, and there are going to be parts where we definitely don't remember.
Yeah.
And that's the body doing the protection through dissociation amnesia. Now,
That's interesting. I notice sometimes clients, if something happened to them in their childhood, unfortunately, they get a warped sense of time. Like they can't tell me when things happen, or they say, I struggle with concepts of time, right? Was it 3 years ago? Was it 5? Um, yeah. And they kind of like lose years
sense
of
of
their,
reality or amnesia, yeah, there's a
yeah.
gap in that memory. It can be a little mix of everything. Also, with patients who are survivors of trauma, we can choose to disassociate
Yeah.
with using drugs, alcohol, sleep. Because when
Our
let's
phones.
or phones, yes. Let's say, for example, that was not a great day we had and we're feeling some of the symptoms, or we had to experience some of the symptoms of PTSD, like hyperarousal.
Yeah.
And we get home at night and that energy is still with us, or we have the nightmare and the energy is still with us through the day. We might pick up the bottle and choose to drink to silence it.
Yeah.
Or let's say, maybe we lost a loved one in a hospital and we had to go to the ER that day. Maybe we will choose to dissociate through cannabis to forget that these events or the energy from that day has happened.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of times where we see substance use and abuse in a lot of our war veterans or trauma survivors.
Yes. Yes. And victims of complex PTSD
Correct.
are often become heavy substance
Yeah.
users.
So it's a maladaptive coping skill, but it's a way to choose to disassociate.
Well, and they do say, right, alcohol and or drug use will silence some of the memories or the voice that not voices and like just the sense of like thoughts you're having, and like it does quiet all of that down, right? So when you get an effective coping skill, you're gonna continue to seek it. Yeah.
Sometimes when we're processing this in the therapeutic space and a patient is in my office, they will leave their body and there will be some depersonalization. And I can see it happen. And the way to usually bring them back is say, let's ground yourself right now. Let's take
Yeah.
a deep breath. Let's think about what color the wall is. What does that pillow feel like? Let's touch the couch. Is it cool or hot? And that helps them to ground themselves through the disassociation. So, yes, we can choose to disassociate. And yes, it can happen without our choice. This isn't a term, but it is a misused element of PTSD
Yeah.
in society, and it is the use of therapy dogs, trauma
We
or
both
service
shared-
dogs,
we both
emotional
shared this
support
with you,
animals.
yes.
And there's a difference between, and I'm not going to get into the difference today, but there is, but let's just talk specifically about service animals. So service animals are, we see them
Highly trained.
highly
Highly
trained.
trained.
It's
There's
a
a really good
form-
Netflix documentary on it.
Oh,
Right.
interesting. I didn't know that.
There's a lot of failed service dogs. It's so cute. Failed service dogs are still amazing dogs. They just like are like too friendly or something. It's cute. Anyway,
So the
I got
service dog is so cute. Is there for a patient to perform specific
yeah.
tasks.
Yeah.
So whether if it's physical pressure and grounding, spatial awareness, alerting, they're there. Or even with diabetics, they can alert of low blood
I was gonna say they're also used for medical reasons. You
Yeah,
can like take an alert for seizure.
diabetes.
And in this case, a lot of PTSD sufferers will use a service dog, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
They're
that
just so like comfort,
yeah,
having
the presence of and safety of an animal.
Mhm.
So service dogs are incredible.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, right now, because we love our dogs, we all do, to get them into Target or to get them onto New Jersey
Airplane.
Transit or airplanes, we are throwing a vest on them and getting that tag off Amazon and just boop, you're now a service dog.
Yeah.
And because of HIPAA, we really don't have to answer questions about our
Yeah.
diagnosis.
Yeah.
And although great that service dogs exist. We need to make sure that they are receiving the proper training. There's a lot of lovely organizations out there that sponsor the training
Yeah.
for trauma survivors and will help put you through the right route
Yeah.
in getting a service dog. But a service dog is not a pet.
Or an emotional support
It
animal.
is not an emotional support animal. An emotional support animal just quickly stays in your residence, and it's there to provide emotional support.
And again, it's diluting the amazing work service dogs do, right?
Oh my goodness, they're such hard workers. They go through such education and training. They go through training with their owner. Something
They always bring a little tear to my eye. They're so sweet. Yeah. So, I mean, listen, like I said, we both are dog owners. We love our dogs. I would bring my dogs lots of places, but I don't. I do think there has been a little crackdown on the emotional support. I've noticed with the airlines, they've cracked down. Like, yeah. So anyway, but service dogs are welcome everywhere. You see the signs, right? You can take your service dog anywhere.
but please be respectful about slapping that vest on.
And don't pretend your dog is a service dog. At the end of the day, if you know if you have service dog or not, don't pretend.
It's also not fair when you take a dog who isn't a service dog and then it is exposed to a dog who is a service dog, and it can distract them from their duty or training because your dog is there misbehaving or wanting to socialize and that dog's doing a job.
Yeah.
So
And just to say, when people see that vest, they assume a certain level of dog, right? Service dogs are almost unflappable, right? Whereas pet dogs are not. Where they're little. I was gonna say humans.
a little reactionary.
Yeah, they're animals. They're animals, just like you know your other dogs, right? So approaching them will be very different, that kind of thing. But yeah, no, that's a good thing to touch on and end on.
Yeah, so we need to keep these conversations going. It's always important to re-educate ourselves. It's always important to feel like we have respect towards true psych speak,
Yeah.
and we're not misusing and abusing these terms and discrediting the people who are survivors of trauma or a medical diagnosis.
Yeah.
Because of social media, Hollywood, and just people chit-chatting.
Yeah, and we don't bring up any of these things to shame anybody.
Really good point.
I just really want to bring awareness around just being mindful of how you're speaking, the terms you're using. What have you adopted casually that maybe you could, like, instead of saying something was traumatizing, could you just say, "Oh, that was just very upsetting to me," or "I felt sad," or "I was scared."
That breakup was very unpleasant.
Yeah, yeah,
So we can have these negative terms without using the PTSD terms.
yeah,
And hey, I hope that everyone receives something from this, and maybe you can share or spread some of the knowledge you received today and just start honest, true conversations about therapy speak.
yep,
The next episode is going to be on personality disorders. And what's so interesting, I like that it comes after PTSD, is that a lot of times we develop a personality disorder after experiencing trauma or
Yeah.
problems with attachment in our lives.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking in the next episode about what personality disorders are. There's 10 of them, the groups that they fit into, and how they truly affect our lives and the terms associated with them that we're really misusing in society right now.
yeah. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to The Mental Edit and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Give this video a like if you found it helpful, and drop a comment with your thoughts or questions. We want to hear from you. You can also DM us on Instagram at The Mental Edit with topics you'd love for us to cover. And if this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. No fluff, no BS, just real talk about what healing actually looks like.